deck the halls with lots of emotions and feelings we're not used to. That's the holidays for us. It brings out these strong feelings, and we're going to talk about that and how we can just move forward more consciously and enjoy the holidays a little bit more. Next week, we're going to talk about more domestic abuse and the holidays, how it affects that. But this week, we're talking about hanging around with relatives and family and friends that we're not usually hanging out with as much, and ways to help ourselves, support ourselves in that sort of situation. So the biggest thing is, I would say, with the holidays is it's so important for us to be consciously making choices to decide ahead of time who we want to be around, what we want to do, and then attend to ourselves. And that's the biggest thing, is that attending to ourselves, because it can be really depleting being around, just different people and the excitement and all of that. It brings out a lot in people. So we're going to start with number 1, consciously choose how we want to show up this season. And I think that's just so important, to just pause and decide, like, hey, I want to show up this way this season. And that comes across with, like, we may have to have some boundaries around that, or we may have requests. And it's super important to know the difference between requests and boundaries. Requests is like, we can request things of people. We can't change people, but we can request things. And boundaries have more to do with us. It's like protecting our physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual space and who we are. And the boundary is about what we will do if something happens. And it's to protect us. It's not to control others, but it's about, like, us having a boundary to take care of ourselves. And that's super important, because I feel like the holidays is a great time for self-abandoning, which has a serious cost, as it diminishes just the fuel in our fuel tank, and we're not showing up authentically and honestly. But either way, it's usually we're going to be getting depleted from all of this. So that's why we're talking about this. So requests and boundaries. Requests are super important because, again, we're requesting things of others, and there's ways of doing it, and I want to give you specific examples. So, for example, maybe we have Uncle Ethan, and whenever we're with Uncle Ethan, he talks about when we were chubby as a kid, and we have chubby as kids story, and he always does this. This is how Uncle Ethan is. A request would be like, I'd like to request we don't, after he starts about, remember how chubby you were when you were 11 years old, and you just say, I'd like to request we don't talk about how chubby I was as a kid. And then we just change the topic, or we ask him a question. And that's a great way to divert people, is to ask them a question. So that's an example. Another one is, for example, like, maybe my kids go on a binge to criticize a relative, and I can just say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this conversation. Can we please talk about something else? And I've actually had that conversation with my kids, because I just don't really feel like it's a worthy topic to be gossiping about others behind their back. So that's a request. It's like, hey, this is, I'm not comfortable with this. I request this, or can we please, whatever. That's a request. And then boundaries, and this is something like, as an overly kind girl, I had really very little latitude or ability to make requests clearly, concisely, from the heart, even know what I wanted. And then I definitely did not have the tools to do boundaries. And so we're going to talk about, like, requests and boundaries even more in future episodes, because it is such a powerful practice. And it's really a practice of self-love and of knowing ourselves, because it's hard to make requests and boundaries when I'm disconnected from myself and I don't know what I want, or what things I'm, like, not going to be okay with. So the first step, for me doing that transformation, is really getting in touch with myself and getting in touch with, where does resentment peak at, because that's showing me that something's usually been crossed, and that's something I need to, decide how I want to move forward with that. Boundaries, again, are there to protect us physically, mentally, spiritually, all the things. And they're very individual for different people. And again, we can't control other people, but we can control what we do. And when it comes to the holidays, I think it's super important for us to decide ahead of time on some things that we know that we're likely going to come across. For example, if we're used to going out with our girlfriends, for they're our high school friends and we go out with them for the holidays, and usually they end up getting sloshed. But yet you're not comfortable with that, or I'm not comfortable with that. I could just say or have a boundary that decide ahead of time. I can either verbalize it or not. And I could just say, I love hanging out with you guys, and if you end up getting drunk, no problem, and I'll get an Uber to go home. And so it's not controlling them, it's letting them be them, but it's also like giving yourself what you want and creating safety for yourself. And I just think that's so powerful. I think, when I used to hear the word boundaries as an overly kind girl, I kind of had this idea of the rigid boundary woman, or the boundary person that was like, very controlling and saying, you have to do that, this is the way it should be. And actually boundaries are definitely a practice, and it's the most self-loving things we can do for ourselves, is to just clearly and accurately just say, if this is what you choose to do, this is what I'm going to need to do. And it doesn't have to be done in anger or this huge thing. It's just clearly and concisely. So that's a really good thing to be able to know. So consciously choose how we want to show up. And I like to show up like with my tools of knowing how to make requests and boundaries if needed. And then the second thing is decide ahead of time who we want to be around, because we don't have to be around anyone. I feel like there's a lot of obligation that comes into the holidays where, oh gosh, we have to be with these people, but we really don't have to. For example, in my family, we typically, my mom and my brother and my sister and I and all our families will get together for, typically we would for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I asked the kids, like, what do you want to do? And I checked in with myself, what do I want to do? And we chose to not go to the holiday thing for the big part, but we chose to connect with them during dessert or something like that. And that was, our choice. And we decided ahead of time what we wanted to do. And I was so appreciative. We had a great time. So decide ahead of time who we want to be around, and we can surround ourselves with healthy relationships, or we can just be comfortable with messy and just expect it. It's just, I think it's funny, like, when we're used to people being a certain way and we kind of want them to be a different way, but they're who they are and they're going to show up the same way. So I think it's funny. I laugh at us. So Uncle Frank, for example, he always wants to talk about the good old days, or maybe Aunt Amy is going to complain about her husband. And this has been going on for years, and it's like, we can either just expect that this is how it's going to go, or we can change the dance and get curious and be like, hey, Amy, it sounds like you're complaining, not too happy with your husband. Why are you still with him? Like, with curiosity. Or we can just be curious about, like, Uncle Frank, tell me more about what was so good about that certain environment. Or we can decide, hey, I don't really want to go into that. So we can literally just change the subject and change the conversation. And, people love to talk about themselves, and that's how we all are. So we just ask them a question and just change the conversation, and people won't even be aware that you've done it, and yet they're happy because they're talking about something about themselves, but it's not something that maybe, you've diverted it from something that you're like, yeah, it just drains my energy when I hear all the complaining about Aunt Amy's husband. Like, I just don't want to do that. So we can actually choose and decide ahead of time who we want to be around. And again, we can consciously choose how we want to show up. Happy holidays. I wanted to make your season a little brighter and lighter. And so I'm offering 2 things for free. One is a relaxing meditation, and the other one is the BARF notebook. And that is a system for working through our feelings and our thoughts by barfing them out, sorting them out, and planning them out. Those are both for free on the website at livebrighter.info. So go ahead and go there and pick up your free gift to help support you this holiday season. And live brighter every day. Make it a great day. The third one, I think, is probably the biggest and the most important thing, is attending to ourselves. And in order to attend to ourselves, we're going to be feeling all sorts of feelings, because that's what a lot of people and a lot of family kind of can generate in us. And so I would say the 4 things with it. Feel all of our feelings, what we label good, bad, whatever. Just feel them, because they're all just information. And it's like, wow, I'm just really angry right now, and I really felt this. And it's just an opportunity to just go a little bit deeper and listen to the parts of ourselves that are getting triggered, or for the child within ourselves that are like, wow, I didn't like that because I felt like the stupid person, which is something I grew up with. And just listen to the child part in us who wants to be heard. And that's a great way to feel our feelings and give attention to ourselves. And then it's really nice because we can also figure out the thoughts that are creating the feelings, because it's not the circumstance. It's not us hanging out with Uncle Frank or Aunt Amy. It's the thoughts that we're putting to the circumstances that's creating the feelings. And so we can kind of just figure out our thoughts that's creating the feelings and kind of work on ourselves. And then just decide, do we want to keep those thoughts? Do we want to, work on our thoughts? Do we want to let it go? And then just really give ourselves self-care and love. It's challenging because it tends to be a busy time, but when we can even step back and just take a few deep breaths, or just get a little time to ourselves to fill our cup in however we do, it can make a huge difference, because it's going to bring up a lot of feelings and emotions, and the little bouts of self-care and love are huge. I want to give you an example of how this was put into practice in my life recently. So recently I chose to be around some extended family for a period of time, family gathering. And I decided ahead of time, I chose how I wanted to show up, and I chose that I wanted to just show up with love and expect the messy and be okay with it. But also I chose that I wanted to be in my empowered version, so that if I really felt like I needed to say something, I could. But by keeping my cup full, then I could actually show up and not be, if I needed to say anything, I didn't need to do it in anger or anything, because I attended to myself. And one thing when it comes to attending to ourselves, or one little key thing I've mentioned a few times, is I look for HALT, which is hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And I'm very aware of these things in myself, because when I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, or a combination, which is even worse, I'm not going to show up as my best version. It's difficult. So I really try to attend to myself in those ways, and HALT and take care of myself. And that's a great thing for the holidays. So, within the family that I chose to hang out with, I just expected it to be messy. And there were a few times I did have to speak up. In the family system, there seems to be a lot of triangles. And what that means is hey, this person's mad at this person, but rather than talking to them directly, they're going to talk to me. Or they're going to talk to somebody else, because rather than direct, clear communication, they would prefer to triangle and gossip. So that seems to be a extended family trait. And there were also times that it was just very, just letting people be themselves. So, but there were a few times that I did speak up, and let me give you an example. Is there was somebody who was just being very black and white as far as kind of judging another person, another relative. And I just had to step in, because I could feel my body being like, ooh, I don't like this. This doesn't feel good to me. I'm going to just say something. So I just said, yeah, that doesn't work for me. I just focus on loving God, loving Jesus, and loving others. And I just kind of leave it at that. And that ended the conversation. I wasn't angry or, anything. It's just standing up and being who I am. And that was very helpful. And then there was another time that I had some relatives that wanting to fix my other cousin's singleness, but he's been single since he's 65, and he's been single this whole time. And I was just like, wow, this is like a repetitive dance that I hear. So I just decided to speak up, and I just said, maybe, he actually likes to be single, and maybe maybe we don't need to try to set him up, because he's had a lot of really nice girlfriends. And, it probably serves him to be single, and he could change that if he wants to. So, it's kind of his job. So, and I think they looked at me like I was an alien, because it was kind of the thing to get him taken care of. But, I just think people can be themselves. And if he wanted to change that, he could. So it was just very interesting. So just loving people and letting people all be shades of gray, because we all are. There's none of us perfect. We all have our weird oddities. I have my weird oddities, and just being okay with that. And then I had to take pockets to meditate, just even a short, I have a 10-minute meditation that I listen to, and it just calms my nervous system. Taking walks in nature, that was very helpful. And then just making sure my cup wasn't empty, because I can't show up at a place where I want to if I am depleted emotionally, physically, if I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So that's what I chose to do for that season. And so that's just an example of how I put those things into practice, about basically consciously choosing how I wanted to show up, deciding who I wanted to be around, putting some, having some requests and boundaries, and that's okay. And then mainly attending to myself so that I could show up in the way that I wanted to. So for Christmas, there's a free barf notebook page, and you can go to my website at livebrighter.info. And you'll see the request for the barf notebook page. And again, that's that great tool that I was talking about, with feeling the feelings, figuring out the thoughts, deciding what you want to keep. And it's basically barfing out your thoughts, barfing them out, sorting them out, planning them out. And that is a wonderful way for us to help ourselves. So that's for free. Woohoo! And then there's also episode 58, which is Let Your Triggers Be Your Training. And that's a great way to take triggers and help us work on ourselves, which is really all we can do. And remember, again, halt. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, then halt, stop, and take care of yourself. So we don't need to abandon ourselves for the holidays. We can actually prioritize ourselves and show up in the way that we want. So consciously choose how you want to show up, decide who you want to be around, and attend to yourself, and have a wonderful holiday season. I believe in you. Make it the best holiday season that you've had. Take care.